The stench of stale blood and fear was the first thing that hit her. It was a thick, coppery smell that clung to the damp stone walls of the holding pen, a perfume she had come to know intimately. Ilara huddled in the corner, wrapping her thin arms around her knees, trying to make herself smaller. The cold from the floor seeped through her threadbare tunic, a familiar ache that had settled deep in her bones months ago. Outside, the crowd roared. It was a beast with 1,000 throats, hungry for spectacle, for pain, for a definitive end. Her end. She traced the jagged, ugly mark on her wrist, a brand seared into her skin that declared her a traitor. The lie felt heavier than any chain. They called her Omega, a word spat like a curse. Worthless, unmated, broken. But the brand was worse. It meant she was poison, a blight on the pack who had cast her out, sold her for a few silver coins to the keepers of the fighting pits. It was a death sentence, just a slower one. A guard rattled the iron bars of her cage. "On your feet, filth. It's time." She didn't look at him. She didn't want to see the contempt in his eyes, the same look she'd seen on every face since the day her world had shattered. Her father, the old alpha, his face a mask of fury and disappointment. The pack elders, their gazes cold and righteous. The man who had framed her, his expression a perfect portrait of feigned sorrow. Lord Valerius. The name was a shard of glass in her memory. Ilara rose slowly, her muscles screaming in protest. They hadn't given her food in 2 days, a standard practice to weaken the combatants, to make the fights messier and more desperate. Her stomach was a hollow cavern of pain. She stumbled as the gate creaked open, and the guard shoved her forward into the narrow tunnel that led to the arena. The roar of the crowd intensified, a physical force that battered her senses. Light flooded the tunnel's end, a brilliant, cruel circle of sand and sunlight. She squinted, her eyes watering. This was it, the final humiliation, to be torn apart for the entertainment of strangers. A flicker of defiance, small and stubborn, sparked in her chest. They could kill her body, but they couldn't have the last piece of her soul. She would not scream for them. She stepped into the arena. The noise was deafening. Thousands of faces blurred into a single monstrous entity in the tiered stone coliseum. They threw refuse. They spat curses. They howled for blood. Ilara kept her eyes fixed on the sand at her feet, each grain a tiny, insignificant piece of a world that had discarded her. Across the pit, another gate groaned open. Her opponent emerged, and a gasp rippled through her. He was massive, a hulking brute of a wolf-shifter, his body a roadmap of scars. His eyes were feral, his lips drawn back in a permanent snarl. He was a killer, a pit champion. This wasn't a fight. It was an execution. The brute cracked his knuckles, a sound like stones grinding together. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He was enjoying her terror. He lived for it. Ilara closed her eyes, preparing for the impact, for the tearing of flesh and the snapping of bone. A strange calm settled over her. At least the cold would finally end. Then, silence. It was so abrupt, so absolute. It was more shocking than the noise had been. The roar of 1,000 voices died in an instant, choked off as if by a single hand. Ilara's eyes snapped open. The brute across from her had frozen, his cruel smile gone, replaced by an expression of pure, primal fear. Every face in the stands was turned in one direction, up, towards the royal box. A figure stood there, cast in silhouette against the harsh sun. He was tall, broad, a specter of absolute power. Even from this distance she could feel it, an aura of crushing dominance that saturated the air, making it hard to breathe. The scent of pine and frozen earth, of a winter that never ended, washed over the arena. The Alpha King, Kalen. Legends and whispers were all she knew of him. A king who had ruled for 500 years from a throne of ice. A warrior who had single-handedly ended the Great War. A soul so cold he had never taken a mate, his heart rumored to be frozen solid in his chest. No one had seen him leave his northern fortress in a decade. Yet here he was. He began to descend the stone steps, moving with a fluid, predatory grace that was utterly silent. The guards, the pitmasters, the nobles, they all scrambled out of his way, bowing their heads, not daring to meet his eyes. His gaze, however, was fixed. Not on the champion, not on the crowd, but on her. Alara's breath hitched. His eyes. They were the color of a winter sky, a pale, piercing blue that seemed to see right through her skin, past the brand, past the filth, and into the battered core of her. She felt stripped bare, utterly exposed. Walked directly towards her, his long, walked directly towards her, his long, dark coat swirling around him like a cloak of shadows. The champion shifter, the brute who had been ready to tear her limb from limb, took a shuffling step back, lowering his head in submission, a whine caught in his throat. Kalen stopped a few feet from her. Up close, he was even more imposing. His face was harsh, carved from granite and unforgiving angles, but it was a masterpiece of lethal beauty. Silver threaded the black hair at his temples. His presence was a physical weight, a cold that had nothing to do with the weather, and everything to do with the ancient, terrifying power he commanded. He looked at the brand on her wrist. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in the depths of those icy eyes. A storm. A glacier calving into a frozen sea. He raised his head, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent Colosseum. It was deep, a low rumble like distant thunder. "I'll take this one." The pitmaster, a fat, sweating man, scurried forward, bowing so low his forehead nearly touched the sand. "Your Majesty, she is a branded criminal, an omega of no value. She is here for sport." The king's gaze shifted to the man, and the temperature in the arena seemed to drop 20 degrees. "I was not asking for your opinion," he said, his voice lethally soft. "I was informing you of my decision." The pitmaster paled, stumbling backward. Kalen turned back to Alara. He extended a hand. It was a large hand, pale and elegant, but a warrior's hand, calloused and strong. She stared at it, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Why? Why her? He was the most powerful man in the world. She was less than nothing. Her hesitation was brief. What choice did she have? A swift death at the hands of the brute? Or this terrifying, incomprehensible mystery? She placed her trembling, grimy hand in his. His skin was cold. Not just cool, but a deep, profound cold, like touching marble pulled from the heart of a mountain. But as his fingers closed around hers, gentle but firm, a strange warmth bloomed in her chest, a tiny, forgotten spark. He pulled her to her feet, his grip steadying her when her legs threatened to buckle. Without another word, he turned and led her from the pit. The crowd parted before them like a receding tide, their shock and awe a palpable wave. No one spoke. No one moved. They just watched as the frozen king led the branded Omega out of the arena, leaving a stunned champion and a silenced world behind him. Ilara didn't look back. She could only feel the cold strength of his hand around hers, a strange and terrifying anchor in the storm that had just become her life. The journey to the northern citadel was a blur. She remembered a black carriage, horses that moved with unnatural speed, and a silence that was deeper than any she had ever known. The Alpha King sat across from her, his gaze fixed on the passing landscape of jagged peaks and snow-dusted pines. He did not speak to her, not once. Ilara spent the entire ride trying to solve the puzzle of him. He had saved her, but for what purpose? Was this some new, crueler form of punishment? A game for a bored ancient monarch? She kept stealing glances at him, trying to read his stony expression. There was nothing. His face was a mask of cold control, his posture rigid. He was beautiful in the way a glacier was beautiful, vast, ancient, and merciless. They arrived at a fortress that seemed carved from the mountain itself, its towers piercing a sky the color of slate. It was a place of ice and shadow, imposing and unwelcoming. Yet, inside, it was not as she expected. Fires roared in massive hearths, casting a warm glow on dark wood and rich tapestries. The air was clean, scented with wood smoke and pine. Servants moved silently through the halls, their eyes downcast, but she saw no fear in them. Only a profound, unshakable respect. An older woman with a severe face and kind eyes met them at the entrance. "Your Majesty," she said, bowing her head. Her name was Lyra. "See that she is bathed and clothed," Kalen commanded, his voice echoing in the grand hall. He still hadn't looked at Alara directly. "Give her the Eastern Suite." Lyra's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she regained her composure. The Eastern Suite. The significance was lost on Alara, but not on the headmaid. "Yes, Your Majesty." Kalen released her hand. The loss of contact was startling, leaving her skin feeling strangely bereft. He turned and walked away without a backward glance, his dark cloak sweeping behind him. He was gone, leaving her alone in a world she couldn't possibly comprehend. The Eastern Suite was larger than the entire hovel she had grown up in. A fire crackled in the hearth. A deep, claw-footed tub steamed in an adjoining room, and a bed piled high with furs looked softer than a cloud. Lyra and two other maids moved with quiet efficiency, helping her out of her rags, their touch gentle, their faces carefully neutral. They did not comment on her emaciated frame or the ugly brand on her wrist. Sinking into the hot, scented water of the bath was a pleasure so intense it was almost painful. She scrubbed away weeks of grime, watching the water turn gray, as if washing away the pit itself. When she emerged, clean and trembling, a simple but exquisitely made dress of deep blue wool was laid out for her. It was warm and soft against her skin. For the first time in a very long time, she felt human. Food was brought to her. A tray laden with roasted chicken, fresh bread, and sweet cheese. She ate ravenously, her body shaking with the sheer relief of it. Every bite was a miracle. When she was done, she crawled into the massive bed, sinking into the furs and the clean linen, and fell into a dreamless sleep that was deeper and more restorative than any she had ever known. The days that followed fell into a strange rhythm. She lived in gilded silence. She had everything she could possibly need: warmth, food, beautiful clothes, books to read. But she was utterly alone. The king did not summon her. She did not see him. It was as if he had plucked her from death and then forgotten her entirely. Her mind, no longer consumed with moment-to-moment survival, began to race. Why was she here? The question haunted her waking moments and whispered in her dreams. Was she a prisoner? A pet? A curiosity to be studied and discarded? The uncertainty was a different kind of torture than the pit. A slow-burning anxiety that coiled in her gut. She began to explore the castle. No one stopped her. The guards would nod respectfully as she passed. The servants would offer a small smile. It was a place of quiet order, a kingdom that ran on silent, established routines. She discovered a library filled with thousands of books, a greenhouse that bloomed with impossible life in the heart of winter, and balconies that offered breathtaking views of the frozen wilderness. It was on one of these balconies, a week after her arrival, that she saw him again. He was in the training yard below, sparring with his captain of the guard. He was shirtless despite the biting cold, his torso a landscape of pale, corded muscle and ancient scars. He moved with a speed and ferocity that was terrifying to behold, his practiced sword a blur of silver. He was not just a king, he was a warrior in his very essence. She watched, mesmerized, as he disarmed his opponent with a fluid, brutal grace. The captain, a giant of a man, was left panting, leaning on his sword. Kalen stood perfectly still, not even breathing hard, his skin gleaming with a light sheen of sweat that didn't seem to steam in the frigid air. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up. His ice-blue eyes met hers across the distance. Her heart hammered against her ribs. He held her gaze for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and then he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod before turning and walking back into the keep. That night, she couldn't sleep. The image of him in the yard was burned into her mind, the power, the control, the cold. But there was something else, too. A profound loneliness she thought she recognized because she wore it herself. A soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find Lyra standing there, holding a heavy cloak lined with white fur. "From the king," the maid said, her voice neutral. "He said the nights are cold on the eastern balconies." Lyra handed her the cloak and left. Alara stood there, her fingers sinking into the impossibly soft fur. He knew. He had seen her watching him. He had noticed she got cold. It was a small thing, a simple gesture, but it was the first crack in the wall of his icy indifference. It was a sign that he hadn't forgotten her after all. She wrapped the cloak around herself. It smelled of him, that scent of pine and winter. It was like being enveloped in his presence. And for the first time since arriving in this cold, silent castle, a fragile seed of hope began to take root in her heart. The next day, he summoned her. She was brought to his study, a vast room lined with dark wood and maps of the known world. A fire roared in a stone hearth large enough to stand in. Kalen sat behind a massive desk, not working, but simply watching the flames. He gestured for her to sit in the chair opposite him. She sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. "Are you comfortable here?" he asked finally, his voice a low rumble. "Yes, Your Majesty," she whispered. "Thank you." "You do not need to thank me." He turned his gaze from the fire to her. "I have brought you here for a reason, Alara." Hearing him say her name sent a jolt through her. "What reason?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "This kingdom is old," he said, his eyes distant. "It is bound by traditions I do not have the luxury of ignoring. My council grows restless. They demand I take a mate, produce an heir." Ilara's blood ran cold. A mate? Was that what this was about? Was he going to force her into some political marriage? Her, a branded Omega? It made no sense. He seemed to read her thoughts. "They have paraded every highborn daughter from every allied pack before me for the last century. None of them were suitable." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "When I saw you in that pit, I felt something I have not felt in a very long time. A flicker, a resonance." "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "You are to remain here," he stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You will be presented to the court as my chosen. You will live as my queen, in title, in name, nothing more." The words hit her like a physical blow. A queen in name only, a placeholder, a shield to keep the political wolves at bay. "This is an arrangement," he continued, his voice hardening, becoming colder than she had ever heard it. "You will have safety, comfort, respect. In return, you will play your part. But you must understand this. There will be no affection between us. There will be no bond. My heart is not capable of such things. Do you accept these terms?" It was a cage, but it was a gilded one. It was a life of lies, but it was a life. The alternative was the pit, or the gutter, or a shallow grave. What choice did she have? I accept, she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Good. He stood, the audience clearly over. He walked to the fireplace, his back to her. From this moment on, you are under my protection. No one will harm you. No one will question your place here. They would not dare. The finality in his tone was absolute. She was his property, his political tool, his queen of ice. She rose and left the study, her heart a confused, aching knot in her chest. He had given her a crown, but he had also drawn a line in the snow, a boundary she was forbidden to cross. And the coldest truth of all was the quiet, dangerous whisper inside her that already wanted to. Life changed overnight. She was no longer the forgotten guest, but the future queen. Lyra was assigned to her permanently, tutoring her in etiquette, history, and the intricate politics of the northern court. Lords and ladies who had previously ignored her now bowed, their faces masks of polite curiosity and veiled jealousy. The most hostile gaze came from a man she recognized with a jolt of ice-cold dread. Lord Valerius, the king's chief advisor, the man who had orchestrated her downfall. He stood at Kaelin's right hand, his face a perfect blend of concern for his king and contempt for her. His eyes, when they met hers, were full of triumphant malice. He had risen far, and now she was in his orbit again. Kaelin held to his word. Their arrangement was one of cold distance. They dined together in the great hall, a vast empty space between them at the long table. They walked the castle ramparts, speaking of pack alliances and trade routes, never of themselves. He was a perfect gentleman, a considerate protector, and a complete stranger. But intimacy, she was learning, did not always respect boundaries. It crept in through the cracks. It was in the way his eyes would find hers across a crowded room, a silent check-in that no one else saw. It was in the books on botany and healing that began appearing in her room after he saw her spending time in the greenhouse. It was in the nightly visits he began to make to her chambers. He would say it was for appearances, to quell court gossip. He would sit in the chair by her fire, a glass of dark wine in his hand, and they would talk. At first it was stilted, formal, but slowly she began to see past the mask. She learned he had a dry, understated wit. She discovered he loved stargazing, that he could name every constellation in the winter sky. One night, he arrived with a small cut on his hand, sustained during training. It was still bleeding sluggishly. "Let me," she said, her voice soft. She retrieved a cloth and a salve from her wash basin. He held out his hand, his expression wary. "It is nothing." "It will fester if it is not cleaned," she insisted. She took his hand in hers. His skin was as cold as ever, a stark contrast to the warmth of her own. She gently dabbed at the cut, her touch feather-light. He flinched. Not a big movement, just a sharp intake of breath, a tightening of his muscles. It wasn't from pain. "What is it?" she asked, looking up at him. His eyes were dark, stormy. "Your hands. They are warm." It was such a simple statement, but the way he said it, with a kind of pained wonder, made her heart ache. She finished applying the salve and wrapped a clean strip of linen around the wound. Her fingers lingered on his for a moment longer than necessary. A current, like a tiny spark of static electricity, passed between them. He pulled his hand back as if burned. "Thank you," he said, his voice strained. He stood and left without another word. After that, the chill between them deepened, but it was a different kind of cold. It was no longer the cold of indifference, but the cold of restraint. The cold of a man fighting a war within himself. She saw him watching her more often, his gaze intense, possessive. He would stand a little closer to her in court, his arm sometimes brushing hers, sending a jolt of heat through her body that was followed by an equal jolt of cold from his. Lord Valerius watched it all, his smile thin and knowing. He saw the bond forming, the one Kaelin had sworn would never exist, and he began to sow his poison. "Your Majesty seems unwell," he would comment in council meetings, his voice slick with false concern. "You look tired, pale." It was true. Kaelin was changing. There were dark circles under his eyes. Sometimes, after one of their late-night conversations, she would see a fine sheen of frost on his skin, near his hairline, or on his collarbones, that would vanish as soon as he moved away from her. He seemed to be carrying a heavier burden, his movements a fraction slower. She confronted him about it one evening. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she said, her voice laced with worry. "You need to rest." "I am fine," he bit out, his tone harsh. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "No, you're not," she insisted, stepping closer. "Kaelin, what is wrong?" He flinched at her use of his name, at her proximity. "Stay back," he commanded, his voice a low growl. "You don't understand." "Then make me understand," she cried, her frustration boiling over. "You brought me here. You put this crown on my head, but you keep me locked out. I see you suffering, and I don't know why." "Because you are the cause of it," he roared, turning on her, his eyes blazing with a desperate, agonizing light. He took a step towards her, then another, backing her up against the cold stone wall. He braced his hands on either side of her head, caging her in. His face was inches from hers, and she could see it clearly now. A delicate, crystalline frost tracing the line of his jaw. "Every moment I spend with you," he whispered, his voice ragged with a pain that tore at her. "Every word we share, every time you touch me, it weakens me, it feeds the thing that is killing me." Before she could process his words, before she could ask what he meant, Lord Valerius chose that exact moment to enter the room. He stopped in the doorway, his eyes taking in the scene. The king, cornered and vulnerable, the Omega girl who was clearly the cause. "My king," Valerius said, his voice dripping with vindication. "I warned you she was poison. Now you see, she is killing you." The world tilted on its axis. Poison. The word echoed the brand on her wrist, the lie that had defined her life. Kaelin pushed himself away from her, stumbling back, his breathing harsh. He looked from her horrified face to Valerius's triumphant one. "Explain," Alara demanded, her voice shaking but firm, her gaze locked on Valerius. "What are you talking about?" It was Kaelin who answered, his voice hollow, defeated. "He speaks the truth. My bloodline carries a curse, an ancient magic laid upon my ancestor, the first Alpha King." He finally met her eyes, and the despair in them was a bottomless ocean. "We are forbidden from love. The moment my heart truly gives itself to another, it will freeze, and I will die." The cold that emanated from him suddenly made a terrible, horrifying sense. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a literal truth. His heart was freezing over, and it was because of her. The warmth she felt, the connection, the burgeoning hope. It was a death sentence for him. "She is a cancer in this court," Valerius pressed, stepping forward. "She must be removed. For your own good, your majesty. For the good of the kingdom." Kaelin looked at her, his face a mask of anguish. The arrangement, the distance, the cold warnings. It hadn't been about cruelty. It had been about survival. His survival. "He is right," Kaelin said, the words sounding like they were being torn from his soul. "You must leave this place. Go somewhere I can never find you. Forget you ever knew me." "No," she whispered, the word a raw protest. "It is not a request," he thundered, his power flaring, shaking the very stones of the room. A layer of ice spread from his feet, cracking across the floor. "It is a command. For your own safety and for mine, you will leave at dawn." He turned and swept from the room, leaving her alone with the triumphant sneer of Lord Valerius and the shattering ruins of her heart. She was poison, after all. Her love, the one true, pure thing she had ever felt, was a weapon that was destroying the man she loved. She didn't run. Dawn came and went, and she was still there, in her chambers, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. How could she leave him? How could she abandon him to this slow, cold death, a fate that would be sealed by the very love she felt for him? To leave would be to admit that Valerius was right, that she was a curse. She refused. For 2 days the castle was a tomb. Calin did not emerge from his chambers. The servants whispered, their faces pale with worry. Lyra brought her meals that she couldn't eat, her eyes filled with a pity that was almost unbearable. Lord Valerius, however, was a whirlwind of activity, asserting his authority in the king's absence, his grip on the court tightening with every passing hour. On the 3rd day, a scream echoed from the royal wing. Alara ran, her heart pounding in her throat. She pushed past guards who tried to stop her, her newfound status as the king's chosen giving her an authority she had never wielded before. She burst into Caelin's chambers. The room was unnaturally cold, her breath pluming in the air. Caelin lay on the floor near the hearth, where the fire had been extinguished, smothered by a creeping frost that covered everything. He was collapsed, his body rigid, his skin pale and translucent, like carved ice. A thick layer of frost covered him, his black hair stark against the crystalline white. His chest was still. He wasn't breathing. "Caelin!" she screamed, rushing to his side. She fell to her knees, her hands hovering over his frozen form. The cold radiating from him was intense, burning her skin. Valerius appeared in the doorway, 2 of his personal guards behind him. His face was a mask of grim satisfaction. "It is as I feared," he announced to the growing crowd in the hall. "The king is dead. The Omega's poison has finally done its work." He pointed a finger at Alara. "Seize the witch. She will pay for her treason." The guards advanced. Alara didn't even look at them. Her entire world had narrowed to the frozen man at her feet. Dead. The word was a lie. She refused to accept it. She could feel him. Deep inside, beneath the ice, she could feel a flicker, a tiny, fading ember of his life force, tethered to her own. "I won't let you have him," she whispered. The words a vow. She threw herself over Caelin's body, a desperate protective shield. "Get her off him!" Valerius commanded. A guard grabbed her arm. His touch was rough, his grip like iron. And in that moment, something inside Alara snapped. The fear, the grief, the rage at the injustice of it all. Her brand, Caelin's curse, Valerius's endless scheming, it all coalesced into a single point of white-hot fury. A wave of heat exploded from her. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a choice. It was a primal, instinctual eruption of power. The guard who held her was thrown backward, yelping, his hand red as if he'd touched a hot stove. The frost on the floor around her vaporized in a cloud of steam. The air in the room shimmered. Everyone froze, staring at her. Alara stared at her own hands. They were glowing with a soft, golden light. The warmth she had always felt, the warmth Caelin had noticed, wasn't just a quirk of her body. It was power. A fire she never knew she possessed. Valerius's eyes were wide with shock, which quickly morphed into fear. "Witchcraft! Kill her now!" The guards hesitated, their fear of her strange new power warring with their loyalty to the advisor. Alara ignored them. She looked down at Caelin, at the ice that encased him. The curse was cold. She was fire. The answer was terrifyingly, beautifully simple. She had to save him. She pressed her glowing hands to his chest, right over his heart. The ice sizzled at her touch, but it was too thick, too ancient. It was draining her, the cold fighting back against her heat. It wasn't enough. She had to give it more. She had to give it everything. Closing her eyes, she focused on the love she felt for him. Not the gentle warmth of their quiet moments, but the fierce, defiant, all-consuming inferno that was roaring to life inside her. She pictured his rare smile, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the cold strength of his hand in hers. She poured all of it, every memory, every feeling, every last shred of her own life force, into her hands. "I love you," she whispered into the frozen silence, "and I will not let you go." The light erupting from her was no longer soft. It was a blinding torrent of pure liquid fire. It flowed from her into him, a river of golden flame seeking out the heart of the winter. The room became a furnace. The tapestries smoldered. The air crackled with raw power. She felt her own energy draining away, her vision going dark at the edges, but she didn't stop. She would burn herself to ash to see him breathe again. There was a sound like shattering glass, a high-pitched shriek of ancient magic dying. The ice encasing Kaelin didn't melt, it exploded outward, vaporizing into nothing. A shockwave of energy threw everyone in the room, including Valerius, against the walls. Alara collapsed onto Kaelin's chest, her power spent, her body limp. The light faded from her hands. Silence descended once more. Then a gasp. A deep, shuddering intake of breath from beneath her. She lifted her head, her strength all but gone. Kaelin's eyes were open. They were still that piercing winter blue, but the frost was gone. The coldness was gone. They were filled with a dawning, incredulous warmth. He looked at her, his expression one of pure awe. He coughed, his hand coming up to touch her face, his fingers tracing her cheek. His skin was warm, not cold. For the first time, his touch was warm. "Ilara," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. Across the room, Valerius staggered to his feet, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "This changes nothing. She is a monster, a fire demon. She has bewitched him." Kaelin's head turned slowly, his gaze pinning his advisor to the wall. The power that rolled off him now was different. It was no longer the oppressive cold of winter, but the vibrant, living power of a thriving kingdom, of a king made whole. "I see everything clearly now, Valerius," Kaelin said, his voice dangerously quiet. He pushed himself into a sitting position, pulling Alara into his arms, holding her protectively against his chest. "I see the lies you spun in my father's court. I see the false testimony you used to have an innocent girl branded and exiled." Alara looked up at him, shocked. How did he know? "Your fire," Kaelin murmured, his lips against her hair. "It didn't just break the curse. It burned away every lie that has touched my life, including the ones about you." He looked back at Valerius, his eyes hardening to blue diamonds. "You tried to kill my queen." The words echoed in the stunned silence. "My queen. Not in name only. Not as an arrangement. As a fact." Valerius paled, his composure finally shattering. "She would have destroyed you. I did it for the kingdom." "You did it for power," Kaelin corrected him, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "And now, you will answer for it." He didn't shout. He didn't have to. He simply looked at the captain of the guard, who had recovered and was now staring in awe. "Take this traitor to the dungeons. He will await my judgment." The captain and his men needed no further encouragement. They seized Valerius, who struggled for a moment before sagging in defeat, his face ashen. They dragged him from the room, his long game of manipulation and treason finally at an end. The room was empty except for them. Kaelin turned his full attention back to Alara, his hands cupping her face, his thumbs gently stroking her skin. He looked at her as if he were seeing the sun for the first time after a lifetime of darkness. "You saved me," he said, his voice thick with a wonder and gratitude so profound it made her want to weep. "I love you," she whispered, the words no longer a desperate plea but a simple, shining truth. "You are my heart," he answered, leaning down and pressing his lips to hers. The kiss was not cold or restrained or hesitant. It was a deluge of pent-up centuries of loneliness and longing, a tidal wave of warmth and love and life. It was a promise, a beginning. In the heart of the winter castle, spring had finally, irrevocably arrived. 6 months passed. The snows in the northern kingdom began to recede earlier than they had in centuries. Small, stubborn wildflowers started to appear in the high mountain meadows, their colors vibrant against the thawing earth. The people said it was a miracle. They called Ilara their fire queen, a bringer of light and warmth to their frozen land. Valerius had been stripped of his titles and lands, sentenced to life in the deepest, most isolated cell in the citadel's dungeons, a fitting end for a man who thrived on whispers and shadows. His conspiracy had crumbled the moment his lies were exposed, his supporters abandoning him to curry favor with the newly vitalized king and his powerful mate. Ilara's brand had been healed, the ugly scar vanishing under Kaelin's touch, which now held a gentle warmth that mirrored her own. She was no longer the branded Omega, the pit fighter, the girl of no value. She was the queen, respected and loved, her counsel sought by Kaelin in all matters. Her quiet strength and innate kindness had won over the court and the people faster than any decree ever could. But her greatest joy was in the quiet moments. She stood on the balcony of their chambers, the one where he had first left her a warm cloak. The sun was setting, painting the snow-capped peaks in hues of orange and pink. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and a familiar chin rested on her shoulder. Kaelin's scent, pine and earth, and now a subtle, underlying warmth, enveloped her. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. She leaned back against his chest, a gesture that was as natural as breathing now. "I was thinking about the first time I saw this view. I felt so small, so alone." His arms tightened around her. "You were never alone. Not from the moment I saw you. My soul knew you even when my mind was too frozen to understand." She turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel the steady, strong beat of his heart beneath her palm. A warm heart. It was a miracle she would never take for granted. "Does it ever frighten you?" she asked softly. "The love, the curse is broken, but—" He silenced her with a gentle finger on her lips. "The curse was never about love, Ilara. It was about the fear of it. My ancestor was betrayed by the one he loved, and his grief twisted into a magic that punished our entire line for his pain. It was a prison of fear. You didn't just break it. You taught my heart that it was safe to feel again." His eyes, once the color of a winter sky, now held the warmth of a summer one. He was still the powerful Alpha King, the formidable warrior. But the merciless glacier had melted, revealing the strong, steady mountain beneath. "I love you," he said, the words as easy and essential as air. "I will spend the rest of my very long life making sure you never feel small or alone again." She smiled, a true, radiant smile that reached her eyes. "I love you too." He bent his head and kissed her, a slow, deep kiss filled with the comfortable certainty of a shared future. The world had tried to break them both. He was a king imprisoned by a frozen heart. She was an Omega branded as worthless. But together they had found a way not just to survive, but to heal. He had saved her from the pit, and she had saved him from himself. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky and the first stars began to appear, Ilara knew she was finally home. She was not just a queen in a castle of stone. She was the fire that warmed its heart, and he was the Winter King who had finally, after centuries of solitude, learned the warmth of the sun. Their new world was just beginning, a kingdom of balance, of fire and ice, built on the unshakable foundation of a love that had proven stronger than any curse.